Many of us, including myself, were just girls when we read Little Women for the first time, and Beth's passing left a lasting impression on our young minds. Just like Joe, we mourn the loss of sweet, gentle Beth, and it's this section of the book that inspired me to research Victorian mourning traditions and create an ensemble for my Becoming Jo March project. Hi, I'm Tiffany of Stitchin Addiction, and I bring historical fashion to life so that you can live out your literary dreams. Since 2020, I've been making clothes inspired by what Jo March would have worn in Little Women. And today, we'll be discussing chapters 37 through 42 of Little Women. Seldom, except in books, do the dying utter memorable words, see visions, or depart with beatified countenances. And those who have sped many parting souls know that to most, the end comes as naturally and simply as sleep. As Beth had hoped, the tide went out easily. And in the dark hour before the dawn, on the bosom where she had drawn her first breath, she quietly drew her last. With no farewell but one loving look, one little sigh. With tears and prayers and tender hands, mother and sisters made her ready for the long sleep that pain would never mar again. Seeing with grateful eyes the beautiful serenity that soon replaced the pathetic patience that had wrung their hearts so long, and feeling with reverent joy that to their darling, death was a benignant angel, not a phantom full of dread. When morning came, for the first time in many months, the fire was out. Joe's place was empty, and the room was very still. But a bird sang blithely on a budding bough close by. The snowdrops blossomed freshly at the window, and the spring sunshine streamed in like a benediction over the placid face upon the pillow. A face so full of painless peace that those who loved it best smiled through their tears and thanked God that Beth was well at last. Most fans of Little Women will agree that chapter 40 is the saddest chapter of the book. All readers seem to love Beth, whether they relate to her or not. And despite her long-standing poor health, can't help but hope that Beth will finally recover and achieve her own castle in the air like her sisters. But as we know, during Joe and Beth's last trip to the seaside, Beth confides in Joe that she believes she will never get well. After their return home, Joe decides to stay home and nurse Beth rather than return to New York City. She does all she can to make Beth comfortable and happy during those months, while struggling internally with letting go of her favorite sister. As we know, Jo is a fighter. She fights for the people and the things that she loves to the point of neglecting her own wants and needs at times. But Beth's slow departure is not something Jo can fight. It is beyond her control, and she wrestles with this helplessness as she watches Beth slip away. After Beth passes, Jo alternates between her anger and her creative work as she grieves her loss of Beth, turning to Father, Marmee, Meg, and finally an old letter from Bear for comfort and advice during this time of mourning. Beth's passing would have occurred in the latter 1860s, which means that the March family would have observed Victorian mourning traditions. To this day, Victorian mourning traditions inspire curiosity, horror, and even admiration. But let's separate the lore from the facts. What exactly would Victorian mourning fashion have looked like for Jo as she mourned the loss of her beloved sister? According to the Ladies' Book of Etiquette and Manual of Politeness, written by Florence Hartley in 1860, there is such a variety of opinions upon the subject of mourning that it is extremely difficult to lay down any general rules upon the subject. Some wear very close black for a long period for a distant relative, while others wear dressy mourning for a short time in a case of death in the immediate family. There is no rule for the depth of mourning or the time when it may be laid aside, and I must confine my remarks to the different degrees of mourning. Degrees of mourning were essentially stages of mourning that dictated the rules of dress. Which stage you chose to observe and how long you observed each stage largely relied on local customs and even personal preference. It was generally noted that Western mourning customs in the United States were not as strictly observed as they were in England. Beyond that, the observance of customs varied from region to region within the U.S. One writer of the day observed that Philadelphians are inclined to carry mourning to extremes, however much more than any of their Atlantic neighbors. They keep their shutters down and their veils bowed much longer than the New Yorker or the Bostonian. In New York, it is too gay. In Boston, fashion is by no means as arbitrary as elsewhere. While the rules of mourning in America may have been arbitrary depending on your ability, your status, and local customs, what we do know is that the general population dressed in mourning fashion as a way to express their grief, and that this fashion progressed from black to lighter and more colorful garments as the wearer moved through the grieving process. As detailed by the Ladies' Book of Etiquette, the first degree of mourning, also known as deep mourning, dictated all black in dress, bonnet, and accessories, including a black veil over the face. Additionally, black fabric was to be plain, without sheen, and little to no trim. The recommended fabrics included silk crepe and silk cotton bombazine, both fabrics that were a plain weave with no sheen. According to some sources, deep mourning was only to be worn by widows. The next degree of mourning recommended the same fabrics in all black, but allowed for wearing white collars and cuffs with simple trimmings allowed on the dress and bonnet. From there, mourning fashion progressed in incremental steps of adding grays, dark purple, and finally lavender to the outfit. These colors would be added as trims and slowly progress to the fabrics used for the dress. Once the mourner began adding gray, purple, and lavender colors, it was considered second mourning. Lavender was the last color to be worn before wearing full colors could be resumed. Fashion magazines and etiquette manuals of the day recommended that quality materials be used in the construction of mourning dress so that it would wear well. Specific fabrics were recommended for varied budgets and climates, including wools of all weights and even sheer black fabrics for warmer climates. Given the prevalence of mourning fashion and of death during the Civil War, many women would have had garments and accessories for mourning in their wardrobes. Like all the other items in the Victorian woman's wardrobe, when a new occasion for mourning arose, these items would have been pulled out, refreshed, remade, and retrimmed to fit the current fashions. While mourning was observed for a longer time period than just the day of the funeral, there were also no fixed rules for the length of mourning, as mentioned by several publications of the era. The most specific guidelines are given by the Bizarre Book of Decorum, the care of the person, manners, etiquette, and ceremonials in 1870, which detailed 6 to 12 months for a child and 6 to 8 months for a sibling. This means that the entire March family would have all mourned Beth's death for a similar length of time. Given these facts and how deeply Jo felt the loss of Beth, I believe that she would have adhered to the more extreme degrees of mourning fashion tradition, wearing black with white collar and cuffs for at least several months following Beth's death. To make Jo's mourning dress, I sourced a black silk crepe for the gown and some black velvet ribbon for the trim. As was customary in this era, I made the dress in 2 pieces, with the bodice and skirt as separate pieces in a day or afternoon dress pattern. The bodice is closely fitted, with fitted sleeves and a high, round neck. It is trimmed with black velvet, matching piping, and buttons down the front. True to period construction of the era, The bodice and sleeves are fully lined with cotton, and the bodice is boned to hold a smooth shape. A white lace-trimmed collar and white cuffs are basted in to help keep the silk dress clean. These could be easily removed, washed, starched, and replaced to help keep the dress fresh. The bodice would have been worn over the typical undergarments of the era: drawers, chemise, and corset. Since Beth's death would have occurred in the latter half of the 1860s, Jo would have been wearing an elliptical crinoline at the time. Petticoats would have been worn both over and under the crinoline. The fashionable crinoline dictated that the skirt shape was no longer round, but that there was more fullness in the back. The skirt is pleated at the sides and back to fit the waistband and fall fully over the crinoline. A matching ruffle along the hem adds a bit of interest while still observing the mourning fashion of minimal trim. Black-heeled button boots and black wool stockings complete Jo's dressing routine. A plain black silk bonnet, black wool cape, and black fingerless gloves keep Jo warm as she visits Beth's final resting place. You can get your own made-to-measure version of Jo's mourning dress by clicking the link in the description. This discussion of chapters 37 through 42 officially concludes the Becoming Jo March series. However, there are 5 more chapters in the book, and I don't want to end the series on the saddest part of Little Women, so there will be one more bonus video in this series. Make sure you subscribe to the Stitchin Addiction channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss this bonus video. Thank you so much for joining me today as we explored what Jo might have worn as she mourned the loss of her beloved sister. Check out the previous video in this series of what Jo and Beth might have worn when they went to the seaside.